Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're slipping past the gilded mirrors and the suspiciously enormous hat boxes into a world so saturated with excess that modern luxury influencers would weep into their ring lights with envy. Welcome to Regency England, where being obscenely wealthy didn't just mean owning more land than common sense. It meant employing more people to fold your handkerchiefs than you had genuine friends. Before you sink into your pillow, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually want to. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight, a four-poster bed, a second-hand sofa, or somewhere far less glamorous. Statistically, a handful of you are listening from a bathtub right now, and honestly, I admire the commitment. Now dim the lights, let the white noise do its work, and get cozy. We're about to spend a night inside a life of powdered wigs, dubious plumbing, and enough social rules to make a corporate HR manual look like a children's picture book. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to have someone else brush your teeth for you? Did the rich ever do a single thing with their own two hands, or was every task quietly outsourced to a person named Agnes? What did the inside of a closet full of silk really smell like after a humid July? How did people entertain themselves before television? Dueling, probably, or judging their neighbor's shrubbery with theatrical intensity? What happened if your carriage wheel snapped on the way to a duchess's garden party? And what exactly is the Regency version of drunk texting an ex at midnight? Congratulations, you've just opened your eyes in the year 1813. You are appallingly, spectacularly rich. You almost certainly own more waistcoats than personality traits, and you have a deep, near-religious aversion to physical labor. Let's see if you can survive one full day as a member of the filthy rich. Good luck. Waking up. You stir not to an alarm, but to the soft creak of a floorboard as a maid tiptoes in carrying a basin of water cold enough to wake the dead. Sunlight creeps through heavy drapes, and before your eyes have even adjusted, two separate people are already arguing quietly over whose job it is to lay out your dressing gown. The house around you hums awake in layers, the shuffle of slippers on stone, the distant clink of a tea tray being assembled, the faint groan of someone hauling water up 4 flights of stairs because heaven forbid you walk down to fetch it yourself. The air smells of beeswax polish, dried lavender, and something faintly like old smoke that no amount of opened windows ever quite removes. Your mattress, stuffed with what feels like an entire flock of geese, is so absurdly soft that you suspect it might be illegal somewhere on the continent. Your sheets are linen so fine it practically apologizes for touching your skin, though you privately wonder how often they're actually washed versus simply aired out and declared clean by decree. There is a ritual to all of this. First, the curtains are flung open with theatrical confidence, letting in exactly enough daylight to make you question every decision you made the night before. Then your valet or your lady's maid appears, delivering the weather report and the first scrap of gossip of the day as casually as if reciting the time. Your job for now is simple. Lie there and look vaguely refreshed, even though half your night was spent mentally rehearsing an apology to your aunt for laughing at the wrong moment during supper. The washing itself is less a comfort and more a small act of bravery. There is no warm tap, no steaming shower, only that basin of water just barely above the temperature of a winter pond, a bar of soap roughly the size and texture of a brick, and a cloth that seems to have been woven specifically to remind you that you are, in fact, alive. You dab at your face as though scrubbing too hard might dissolve you entirely, while a servant stands nearby pretending very hard not to notice you flinching. In modern terms, it's the equivalent of washing up at a 5-star campsite where the reviews are written exclusively by people who can have you disinherited. By the time you're dry, someone is already holding your robe open for you, because privacy, much like central heating, simply hasn't been invented yet for people of your station. You are a celebrity in your own bedroom, observed and assisted by a small staff who know your scars, your moles, and your unreasonable hatred of the color puce. Hair and grooming follow, and this is where things get genuinely competitive. Combs of polished horn, brushes stiff enough to double as garden tools, and more scented oils than an entire modern spa lobby. Every curl is debated as though it were a matter of state. The desired result is a look of effortless, natural beauty that somehow required 3 separate people and 45 minutes of negotiation to achieve. By the time your hair is declared presentable, you could have composed a sonnet, invented a new breakfast pastry, or at the very least taken a short nap. Breakfast is still ahead of you, but for now you are simply expected to drift elegantly around your chamber in your dressing gown, trying not to trip over your own slippers while servants whisk away the evidence of your morning ablutions. As you finally turn toward the wardrobe, the next great ordeal of the day, you allow yourself one small, silent wish for 5 more minutes under the blankets. There is no time for that, of course. A new day of Regency excess waits for no one, and it takes an entire small staff to extract you from your bed and prepare you to be seen by the outside world. The bed itself. Your bed is less furniture and more architecture, a towering structure of carved oak, heavy curtains, and stitching so elaborate it could double as a tapestry in a lesser household. And yet beneath all that grandeur lurks genuine peril, strange lumps in the mattress, mysterious stains nobody discusses, and the constant, low-grade threat of bedbugs who apparently consider themselves minor aristocracy in their own right. This is no memory foam marvel with a satisfaction guarantee. This is a soft, lumpy monument to centuries of questionable bedding science, stacked 3 mattresses high, so that climbing into it feels less like going to sleep and more like attempting a small expedition. The sheets are clean in the loosest possible sense. The housemaid and the footman appear to operate under 2 entirely different definitions of the word, one involving actual soap and the other involving a vigorous shake out of a window and a hopeful prayer. Once you're nestled in, you're wrapped in a fog of starch and perfume. The quilted coverlet on top is heavy enough to genuinely pin a small child to the mattress, and the embroidered pillow shams loudly announce, to anyone who happens to glance at them, that your family is both extremely wealthy and extremely anxious for everyone to know it. Your feet, somewhere in the depths of all that bedding, occasionally discover unidentified objects, a forgotten sachet of dried herbs, a cold, damp patch you'd rather not investigate, the corner of a handkerchief that has clearly been lost in there since last autumn. You lie back and listen. The chamber, so refined by day, is anything but peaceful at night. The walls creak with every gust of wind. Something is shuffling beneath the floorboards, a small rodent symphony that no amount of family wealth has yet managed to silence. Occasionally, you hear the soft pad of a servant's feet in the hallway, or the faint clink of a chamber pot being discreetly exchanged, because nothing says luxury quite like a porcelain bucket tucked beneath your bed, patiently awaiting its moment. And then, of course, there's what you can't see. The bedbugs, the invisible aristocracy of the mattress world, conducting their own quiet feast on the very people who invented the art of sleeping in. Every morning brings a fresh constellation of unexplained bites, and you begin to suspect that somewhere between the seams of your mattress, an entire shadow parliament has convened. The smell of the room is its own complicated achievement, a blend of perfume, warm skin, and whatever chemical reaction occurs when old feathers meet a humid night. Bowls of dried potpourri attempt valiantly to mask it, but by midnight the room always reverts to its natural state, somewhere between a museum gift shop and a damp aviary. The windows, for the record, are purely decorative. Actually opening them would let in fresh air and, worse, more wildlife. Each morning a small battalion of servants descends to fluff, beat, and shake the bedding, until the room resembles a snow globe of dislodged feathers and dust. You watch this performance from a safe distance, sipping chocolate, pretending not to notice the small avalanche of crumbs and stray hairpins tumbling to the floor. Despite all of this, you are expected to emerge each morning radiant and refreshed. The truth, of course, is that you've spent the night quietly battling unseen enemies, lumps, pests, smells, and a low hum of existential dread that only arrives when you realize your mattress predates several wars. Still, when the sun finally slants across the room, you can't help but feel a flicker of gratitude. Sure, you've acquired several new itches and a fresh suspicion of pillows, but you are rich, alive, and there's a servant standing by with clean linens and even fresher gossip. The servants. There are so many staff drifting through the house that at some point you stopped learning names and started assigning numbers instead. You're not entirely sure what half of them actually do, though you strongly suspect at least one person is employed full-time to polish a single decorative vase. Without them, you would be forced to confront the horrifying possibility of doing your own laundry. From the moment your eyes open, your entire day is orchestrated by an invisible workforce operating with the quiet precision of a minor government agency. There's the valet, materializing each morning like a perfectly pressed ghost, carrying your fresh shirt and managing your wardrobe as though a poorly chosen waistcoat might trigger an international incident. The lady's maid, who seems to remember every hairstyle and every emotional crisis you've ever had, drifts in offering a hairpin with the gravity of a field surgeon handing over a scalpel. Downstairs, the butler presides over the household with the calm authority of someone who may, in fact, be capable of stopping time itself. His domain is the dining room and the wine cellar, guarded with more vigilance than most family secrets. If you ever need to find him, simply listen for the soft jingle of keys and the long-suffering sigh of a man who has just discovered the silver has been misplaced again. The housekeeper rules the corridors like an uncrowned queen. Her ring of keys could anchor a small rowboat, and her stare alone has been known to silence an entire room of footmen mid-sentence. She knows exactly how the household actually functions, including the quiet, decades-long rivalry between the laundry staff and the kitchen staff over the use of the back stairs, a conflict whose origins nobody alive can fully explain. In the kitchen, the cook reigns with a wooden spoon that carries more authority than most minor nobility. Meals appear and vanish with bewildering speed, and very little explanation offered. The scullery maid scrubs pots from dawn until her hands are permanently wrinkled, quietly dreaming of a future that does not involve quite so much grease. Then there are the countless others, footmen who materialize the instant a door needs opening, chambermaids locked in an eternal struggle against unexplained stains, a coachman who has, as far as anyone can tell, never once smiled in his life. You begin to suspect there are more people living and working in this house than there are actual members of your family. There are specialists too, the lamplighter who slips through the house at dusk like a candle-lit phantom, the gardener whose sole apparent purpose is losing your favorite flowers while somehow producing prize-winning vegetables nobody asked for, the stable hands who treat the horses with more tenderness than most parents show their children. Even the boy whose only job is polishing boots plays his small part in the grand machine. Your main responsibility, as master or mistress of the house, is mostly just to avoid tripping over anyone. Occasionally, you're required to issue a vague, aristocratic instruction. See to the curtains, attend to that, polish something. But mostly you try not to look too startled when an unfamiliar servant bows to you from a darkened hallway. You begin to suspect the staff know your schedule better than you do. Once, after casually mentioning a craving for almond cake, 3 varieties appeared by tea time, one of them bearing your initials in sugar icing. You're not saying they can read minds. You wouldn't bet against it, though. In quiet moments, you wonder who's really running things. Because while you drift from breakfast to a stroll to an afternoon nap, it's the servants quietly keeping the entire estate turning, fed, clean, functioning, while you remain blissfully unaware of how a laundry mangle even operates. The whole household is a clock wound, and maintained by people who could, if they ever chose to, dismantle your entire reputation with nothing but a feather duster and a well-placed word. In the end, you accept the truth. You may hold the title and the inheritance, but it's the staff who genuinely keep the show running, And if you're lucky, they'll let you believe otherwise, right up until the day you try to make your own bed. Washing and grooming. Forget bathing, it's all sponges. Lukewarm water and an impressive tolerance for uncomfortable eye contact. Soap is a luxury. Perfume is mandatory. You will emerge from this ritual technically cleaner, but smelling distinctly like a candle shop caught in a rainstorm. There is no hot cascade of water to ease you into the day, only a basin of water that was warm roughly an hour ago, now refreshed with a thin trickle of something only marginally less cold. Your maid stands by, sponge in one hand and towel in the other, wearing the resigned expression of someone who has long since accepted that this is simply how mornings work. You stand shivering in your robe as she dabs carefully at your neck and wrists, taking great care not to disturb your painstakingly arranged hair. The objective isn't truly cleanliness so much as the appearance of cleanliness. Anything resembling a real bath requires hours of preparation, multiple footmen hauling buckets up several flights of stairs, and what feels suspiciously like a formal permission slip from your physician. The sponge, therefore, reigns supreme, and your dignity politely excuses itself from the room. When soap does appear, it's a rare and precious guest, often homemade, lumpy, and carrying the unmistakable scent of last season's lavender mixed with something distinctly animal. Don't get attached to it. Too much scrubbing is widely believed to leave your skin vulnerable to all manner of outside ills, and nobody wants to be the family member accused of reckless hygiene. Once patted dry, the real transformation begins: the perfume. There is an entire art to Regency fragrance, a delicate line between alluring and why does the parlor suddenly smell like a funeral home. You dab rosewater along your wrists, sprinkle something floral across your collarbone, and finish with a generous spritz of something musky enough to stop a horse mid-trot. You're assured this is the very height of sophistication. It is also, conveniently, the only thing standing between you and the collective judgment of the breakfast table. Grooming doesn't stop at scent. Hair must be brushed to a near impossible shine, and as for teeth, let's not get ahead of ourselves. A quick scrub with a twig or a dab of charcoal passes for dental care, followed by a rinse with something so bitter it tastes faintly of regret. You smile and hope your fortune distracts from your breath. For the men, shaving is its own minor act of trust. Your valet stands ready with a straight razor, and you do your best not to flinch as he navigates the terrain of your jaw. If luck isn't on your side, you'll emerge with a small nick and a scrap of tissue stuck stubbornly to your chin. The women face their own trials, plucking, smoothing, pinching color into pale cheeks to fake a healthy glow. Both genders inevitably end up with a patchy spot or two, courtesy of a rushed sponge and very little actual sunlight. The whole process takes far longer than it should, and somehow you still feel as though you've missed a spot, possibly several. There's no time to dwell on it, though. The day's schedule waits for no one, and there are already people outside your door arguing about what you should be wearing. One last glance in the mirror, one final adjustment of your robe, and you inhale deeply. You smell like an overzealous bouquet and look like someone recently startled by cold water and their own reflection. But by the standards of Regency England, you are washed, scented, and ready to face the world. As you sweep into the hallway trailing a cloud of rose and something vaguely citrus, you can rest easy knowing you are, at minimum, cleaner than you were yesterday. And in this era, that counts as a genuine triumph. Getting dressed. Getting dressed is less an act of self-expression and more a high-stakes game of structural engineering. Silk stockings, breeches, waistcoats, a cravat, and an overcoat substantial enough to function as emergency shelter. You will need a full staff, a strategic plan, and roughly 3 hours if you intend to make it to breakfast fully clothed. The first real challenge is standing perfectly still while your valet or maid surveys you the way a general inspects troops before battle. Your opinion is not required. They have a vision layered, structured, and unreasonably tight, And that vision will be realized, even if it means physically maneuvering you into your trousers while humming something ominously cheerful. The room fills with the soft rustle of linen, the gentle clink of buttons, and your slowly dawning suspicion that beneath all this finery, your circulation is being quietly compromised. Undergarments come first, and even this is an ordeal. For men, plain linen drawers and a slightly scratchy undershirt. For women, a chemise and a corset requiring two strong assistants and an almost spiritual faith in survival. The maid pulls the laces with the seriousness of someone hoisting a ship's anchor, while you grip the bedpost and try to recall what unrestricted breathing once felt like. The corset isn't merely supportive, it's a full lifestyle commitment. By the third tug, you've developed a newfound, deeply personal relationship with your own ribcage. Stockings come next, impossibly smooth, silk if you're fortunate, wool if you've somehow offended the laundry staff. Pulling them on is like wrestling a slippery, aristocratic eel that will absolutely gossip about you for weeks if you snag it. Once your legs are properly wrapped, the breeches arrive, seemingly engineered for one purpose only: humility. Too tight and you'll walk as though wading through wet sand. Too loose and the butler will raise an eyebrow sharp enough to slice bread. Then the waistcoat, decorative, occasionally suffocating, and buttoned from belly to collarbone, each fastening a small crisis if you're in any kind of hurry. The pattern is its own statement: florals for the bold, stripes for the cautious, brocade for the wildly optimistic. Women, meanwhile, are layering petticoat upon petticoat upon petticoat, topped finally with a gown whose sleeves could comfortably hide a small family of cats and a skirt wide enough to require its own gravitational pull. And then, of course, the cravat, a strip of fabric serving simultaneously as neckwear and as a test of patience. There are entire pamphlets devoted to tying it correctly. There are diagrams. There are, in truly desperate households, dedicated staff whose sole function is to fold, knot, and shape it until you resemble someone with a small, fashionable cloud attached to your throat. Too tight and you risk fainting during morning prayers. Too loose and your aunt will mention it in her next letter to half the county. By this point, the room looks like a battlefield of discarded fabric and personal dignity. Your staff hover nearby, offering unsolicited opinions on color coordination. You realize you've been standing here nearly an hour and are still, technically, not dressed. Now the coat arrives, part armor, part walking advertisement for your family's wealth. It's heavy, precisely tailored, and gives you the posture of a statue commemorating someone far more important than you. For the women, the final gown descends over the head with all the solemnity of a religious rite. Accessories follow: polished shoes, jeweled hairpins, a watch chain, gloves, a fan, and if you're feeling particularly bold, a snuff box or two. You are now technically dressed, though movement remains a calculated risk. Sitting down is dangerous. Reaching for toast requires what feels like an advanced degree in textile engineering. By the time you finally arrive at breakfast, you're flushed, exhausted, and nursing the early symptoms of a cravat-induced headache. You have survived the ultimate trial of the Regency elite, getting dressed. And as you take your seat, you silently pray the day holds no surprise costume changes before supper. Breakfast. Your morning meal is less about nourishment and more about quietly asserting dominance over the lower orders via soft-boiled eggs and a truly excessive amount of toast. You sip chocolate or tea while relatives silently evaluate your marmalade technique. It is, somehow, the most stressful meal of the day. Breakfast in Regency England bears no resemblance to a hurried modern affair eaten standing at a counter. It is a fully choreographed display of wealth, decorum, and emotional stamina, performed against the backdrop of ticking clocks and the soft clatter of expensive silverware. You don't simply wander downstairs. You descend a grand staircase as though making a minor royal appearance, clutching the banister as your shoes attempt, with quiet malice, to end your day early. The dining room is its own stage. The table stretches far enough that you could plausibly launch a small boat down its center. The linens glow in the morning light, and the plates are so delicate you're almost afraid to breathe near them. The place settings form a small minefield of forks, knives, and mysterious spoons whose purpose remains, even now, slightly unclear. Your real objective isn't eating, it's avoiding public embarrassment before noon. Servants drift through the room like quietly efficient ghosts, refilling cups and presenting dishes with all the solemnity of a religious ceremony. The butler oversees the whole production as though personally responsible for the fate of nations. One careless move, a dropped napkin, a roll that tumbles to the carpet, and you'll be remembered at family gatherings for a decade as the one who couldn't manage a simple piece of bread. As for the food itself, there's no grabbing and rushing. Soft-boiled eggs sit primly in porcelain cups, awaiting decapitation with surgical precision. Towers of toast arrive already cooling, accompanied by jars of preserve labeled in barely legible French. There's a rice and fish dish best approached with cautious optimism, kidneys for the adventurous, and enough butter to concern any modern physician. Drinks reveal character, tea for the devout, coffee for the worldly, and a thick, syrupy hot chocolate for those unapologetically committed to indulgence. Conversation is its own quiet form of chess. No topic is entirely safe, though everyone gives it their best effort. The weather always somehow disappointing. The neighbors somehow worse. If you're feeling daring, news from London. Every sentence is a small calculated maneuver. Too much enthusiasm and you'll be accused of gluttony. Too little and someone will write home suggesting you've fallen ill. Breakfast doubles as the unofficial opening session of the day's rumor mill. There's a particular rhythm to it, a cautious, "Have you heard?" a collective leaning in, then a flurry of whispered speculation about a neighbor's hairstyle or a mysterious carriage spotted near the apothecary at dawn. You learn quickly to eat slowly and listen carefully, lest you miss something genuinely worth repeating later. And yet for all the anxiety, there's an odd comfort to the ritual, the gentle scrape of a spoon against an eggshell, the smell of warm bread and orange peel, candlelight catching on polished silver. For a brief window, the chaos of the wider world seems held at bay by sheer force of habit and cholesterol. By the meal's end, you've navigated a gauntlet of etiquette and emerged largely unscathed, achieving the day's first true victory, breakfast without scandal. Family at the table. Siblings, cousins, and that one aunt who may or may not be quietly engineering your downfall. Breakfast is a battlefield of etiquette, gossip, and concern disguised as passive aggression. Somehow you survive, though only barely. The table looks orderly enough, but the real action takes place above the linen, in sharp glances and carefully chosen words. You've barely sat down before the questioning begins, delivered with the gentle precision of a velvet-trapped hammer. "Did you sleep well, dear?" your mother asks, in a tone implying she's heard otherwise. Your siblings exchange knowing looks, silently wagering on whether you'll confess to last night's extra slice of cake. Your younger brother kicks you under the table, a wordless plea to pass the marmalade and please, not bring up yesterday's incident with the dog. Your elder sister sits with perfect posture, sipping tea as though it contains the secrets to social dominance. She asks politely about your plans for the day, though what she's really probing for is whether you intend to embarrass the family with another impromptu speech. Then there's your aunt, a living institution in her own right, who adjusts her cap and surveys you with the calculating eye of a general planning a siege. "You look a touch pale this morning," she remarks. Translation: you look suspiciously well-rested for someone contributing nothing of value to this household. Your uncle, meanwhile, hides behind a newspaper, occasionally grunting agreement with whoever currently holds the floor. His main function appears to be avoiding any topic riskier than the weather, nodding along just enough to escape being drawn into discussions of money, marriage, or, heaven forbid, politics. Inevitably, the conversation circles back to fortune, inheritance, and who is most likely to marry well. Your cousin launches into an enthusiastic account of her suitor's land holdings, while your brother quietly checks the family silver, just to be sure nothing has wandered off into someone's pocket. Old scandals resurface, dragged out specifically to distract from this morning's fresher indiscretions. Do you remember what happened with Cousin Edmund? Someone offers. Hopping the mere mention shifts attention away from their own recent misstep. Through it all, you do your best to eat your eggs in peace, navigating the treacherous currents of family affection and rivalry. Vague, noncommittal answers are your best defense. Fail at that, and you'll find yourself volunteered for an afternoon of charity visiting with the vicar's wife, a fate generally agreed to be worse than mild exile. And yet there's a strange comfort in the chaos. Your youngest sibling will spill something. Your cousin will sneak a second helping when nobody's watching. Your aunt will, without fail, declare that standards simply aren't what they used to be. By the meal's end, you marvel at the sheer endurance required to survive breakfast with people who share your blood. You finish the last of your toast, exchange weary glances with your siblings, and silently vow to avoid anything resembling a serious conversation until at least tea time. The morning walk. Before midday, you must be seen outdoors. This involves changing clothes, parading the grounds, and pretending to admire nature while quietly competing with the neighbors over whose roses are more impressive. Sometimes the walk is so exhausting you need a nap afterward simply to recover. The Regency morning walk has nothing to do with fitness, and very little to do with fresh air, which is generally agreed to be tolerable only in small, carefully managed doses. The walk exists for one purpose alone: visibility. It is your opportunity to be seen, admired, or at minimum politely acknowledged from a respectful distance. After all, what's the point of inheriting acres of immaculately maintained lawn if no one is around to witness you wandering it aimlessly, squinting thoughtfully toward the horizon? First, the outfit. No one simply steps outside. Men require a tailored coat, gleaming boots, a freshly tied cravat, and a hat positioned at a precise, almost mathematical angle. Women are arranged into walking dresses, gloves, a bonnet trimmed with enough ribbon to rig a small ship, and a parasol designed to deflect both sunlight and unwanted commentary. You are no longer simply a pedestrian. You are a mobile display of fashion and inherited wealth. The grounds become your stage. Every gravel path, rose arbor, and ornamental pond is a chance to be seen, ideally mid-laugh at nothing in particular, or pausing thoughtfully to admire a flower you happen to be mildly allergic to. Servants are positioned at intervals, ready to admire your progress and provide the illusion of spontaneous applause. You are, of course, not alone. The neighbors have timed their own strolls to maximize the odds of an accidental encounter, and a slow-motion social competition unfolds. One household has acquired a new marble fountain. Another has procured a rare swan that seems to be plotting something. The true arms race, however, plays out through gardens, meticulously maintained, occasionally suspected of being bribed with treats to bloom on cue precisely as guests walk past. Conversation remains breezily insincere throughout. "What a fine morning," someone remarks, even as storm clouds gather. "The hedges are looking particularly full this year," another offers, as though hedge density were the ultimate measure of a family's success. Every comment is coded. A remark about the weather might really mean, "I saw your cousin leaving the card room rather late last night," and a compliment on your garden might be a quiet jab at last year's poorly managed pruning. As for exertion, it's a careful balance between obligation and genuine effort. You wander from the ornamental ditch designed purely for visual interest, to the folly, a structure built for no purpose beyond impressing guests, and finally to a lake nobody has ever actually swum in. Should the walk extend beyond, say, 3 flower beds, you are fully entitled by long tradition to complain of fatigue and request a restorative snack. A well-timed dizzy spell, in fact, earns you both a seat in the shade and quiet admiration for knowing your limits. Eventually, after one full circuit of the grounds, an exchange of shallow compliments and a silent contest over whose dog looks fluffier, you retreat indoors. You've survived another walk, preserved your reputation, and almost convinced yourself you enjoyed it. Almost. In Regency England, the morning walk is an exercise, it's theater, quiet diplomacy, and an ongoing contest to outgarden the competition. Indoor leisure. With hours to fill and absolutely nothing productive expected of you, you master the fine art of doing nothing, card games, needlework, and the thrilling sport of enduring a cousin's poetry recitation until your soul quietly leaves the building. Occasionally, you fake a headache simply to escape. This is Regency leisure, a long, unhurried stretch of day in which the clock itself seems to have joined you in accomplishing absolutely nothing. You settle into the drawing room, a cavernous space full of sofas that look inviting but are, you suspect, secretly engineered to discourage actual napping. Sunlight filters through layers of lace, illuminating drifting dust and the unimpressed gaze of an ancestral portrait, whose chief life achievement appears to be enduring this much idleness without taking up competitive complaining as a hobby. The first decision of the afternoon is entertainment. If fortune favors you, someone suggests cards. Whist is the reigning favorite, a game calm and repetitive enough that you could mentally compose your shopping list while playing an entire round. The stakes are low, except where pride is concerned, in which case the tension is enormous. Nobody wants to be the one who misplays a suit or admits, 3 rounds in, that they never quite understood the rules. For those uninterested in cards, there's embroidery. The women gather, needle and silk in hand, appearing diligently focused while quietly trading the day's best gossip. A perfectly executed stitch matters far less than a well-placed rumor about who wore an unfortunate color to last week's dinner. Inevitably, someone produces a book of poetry, always a cousin, always sincere, always utterly convinced that the room is desperate to hear a dramatic recitation. You brace yourself, teacup steady, as your attention gently drifts away on a tide of slow, drowsy verse. Eyelids droop around the room. Someone in the back begins knitting with suspicious aggression, clearly channeling existential frustration into yarn. If the weather cooperates and boredom grows truly dangerous, the group might attempt an indoor game, charades, blind man's bluff, or the ever-popular guessing game of which relative has hidden the good brandy. These games operate under the unspoken understanding that mild cheating isn't just permitted, it's necessary for anyone hopping to retain their sanity. Laughter bubbles up, polite and restrained, beneath which lies a collective silent plea for something, anything, to actually happen. For the men, a strategic retreat to the billiard room offers temporary relief, where the main topics of conversation are the poor condition of the table felt and the rising cost of hay. By late afternoon, you find yourself staring out a window, counting passing carriages, inventing elaborate backstories for crows. Time stretches strangely as you watch the clock inch its way toward tea, your one reliable excuse for actual conversation. In Regency England, boredom is a discipline, practiced and perfected with genuine dignity. You're not just enduring it, you're mastering it. And when you finally retreat to your room, you do so quietly, knowingly, having survived yet another round of parlor games and polite nothingness, fully aware that tomorrow it all begins again. Letter writing. Correspondence is both art form and weapon. You'll spend half the morning composing carefully worded notes, and another hour sealing them with enough wax to start a small fire. Every letter is a gamble. Will your latest remark be the talk of the parlor, or will you find yourself quietly exiled to the countryside? The daily letter-writing hour is no casual affair. It begins with a stack of crisp, monogrammed paper, ideally scented with something pleasant rather than yesterday's dinner, and a quill sharp enough to draw blood if mishandled. Servants deliver bundles of incoming post with all the solemnity of royal messengers, faces giving nothing away about the drama folded inside. There's always a pile waiting, invitations, replies, a warning about a cousin's recent misadventure at the local assembly, and at least one suspicious envelope from someone you'd hoped had relocated permanently to Scotland. Seated at your writing desk, you assemble your arsenal: ink, blotting sand, sealing wax, and years of carefully honed social instinct. First on the list is your aunt's letter, a masterclass in guilt disguised as family news. "It has been so very long since we heard from you," she writes, "and I do hope you haven't entirely forgotten your poor relations." You respond with just enough warmth to satisfy her, but not so much that it invites a week-long visit. Then come the invitations, endless invitations, to balls, card parties, charity bazaars, each one another opportunity for someone to inspect your outfit and quietly note your seat at the table. Declining requires precision. Too abrupt and you're branded cold. Too enthusiastic and you may accidentally agree to host an entire evening of amateur poetry. The real entertainment, of course, is gossip. Every letter carries the seeds of a scandal, lightly watered for maximum bloom. "Did you hear about Lord Ashworth's unfortunate incident with the garden pond?" You write to a trusted confidant, fully aware your words will travel from parlor to parlor faster than any modern headline. Correspondence is the Regency Internet. Nothing is officially true until it's been written down, and nothing, once sent, is ever truly forgotten. You write with the precision of a surgeon weaving compliments around gentle insults, concern laced with calculated ambiguity. "Her new hairstyle is certainly bold. I never would have thought to place feathers quite there, but she does have such an inventive spirit." There's an entire private vocabulary at play. Interesting means unfortunate. Spirited means barely contained chaos. Improving means in need of an outright miracle. Once the letters are finished, the ceremony of sealing begins. Wax drips onto the flap, inevitably onto your finger as well, and you press your seal down with all the authority of someone bestowing a knighthood. The faint smell of scorched wax is, in its own strange way, the smell of victory. You admire your work as a footman carries the letters away, already anticipating tomorrow's flurry of replies and reactions. Every letter you send is, in its own way, a small gamble. Will the joke land? Will the sarcasm be mistaken for sincerity? Will you be the talk of the drawing room or quietly dropped from the next guest list entirely? Only time will tell. And so you sit, ink-stained fingers and all, plotting your next move, because in Regency England, words carry real weight, sealing wax carries real power, and any given note might be the start of your greatest triumph or your swiftest social downfall. Social calls. Nothing announces status quite like dropping by another household specifically to inspect their wallpaper and silently judge their tea service. This requires yet another outfit change, more servants, and the constant risk of a social misstep, such as calling someone's beloved pug unflatteringly plump. Preparing for a social call is a full operation disguised as casual leisure. You might assume that after breakfast and the obligatory morning walk, you'd be permitted some rest. Society disagrees, especially with someone still wearing their breakfast cravat. The first sign that visits are imminent is the sudden, coordinated arrival of half your household staff, arms full of clothing, shoes, hats, and what might be a parasol or possibly an experimental weather instrument. The outfit change is non-negotiable. Morning attire is acceptable for breakfast and idle indoor pursuits, but never, under any circumstance, for being seen in public, even if public simply means a neighbor's drawing room 4 doors down. Your maid or valet, already deep into their second cup of tea, briskly dismantles your earlier efforts and begins assembling something new entirely. There's strategy involved in the timing of visits. Arrive too early and you risk catching your host unprepared, a genuine social catastrophe. Arrive too late and you're branded unreliable, which in Regency terms ranks only slightly above outright villainy. Servants are sent ahead bearing calling cards, an elaborate system that announces who is visiting whom, who is conveniently not at home, and who must now scramble to produce fresh cake and convincing enthusiasm. The carriage ride itself is its own small trial. Should the weather permit walking, you may opt to do so, giving you a chance to display your latest hat and feign surprise at accidentally running into a neighbor who is, astonishingly, also dressed to the nines for what should be a quick errand. Upon arrival, more servants await, silently assessing your punctuality, your shoes, and the quality of your calling card. Once inside, you're shown to the drawing room, where your host, equally uncomfortable in their own freshly assembled outfit, greets you with the formal enthusiasm of someone bracing for minor surgery. The visit unfolds as a careful dance of compliments and small talk, punctuated by surreptitious glances at the furniture. You comment on the curtains, admire a portrait of an ancestor with unsettling eyebrows, and praise the tea blend, all while avoiding the more treacherous terrain of actual gossip. Unless, of course, your host raises it first. You remain just long enough to seem genuinely interested, but not so long that you're offered a second cup of tea, which is the universal signal that you've overstayed your welcome. With one final compliment on the flower arrangements and a quick check that your gloves haven't vanished into the upholstery, you make your exit. By the time you arrive home, you're both exhausted and quietly triumphant. Another visit survived. Another day's social expectations met, all without insulting anyone's dog. Afternoon tea. Tiny cakes, impossibly small sandwiches, and the ongoing struggle to look composed while eating a scone roughly the size of your fist. Tea is where reputations are gently built, occasionally destroyed, and on rare occasions drowned in a puddle of spilled milk. Afternoon tea is not merely a meal. It's a live performance staged with porcelain props and social stakes balanced on the edge of a silver knife. It opens with a parade of teapots, one for every conceivable blend, poured with all the gravity of a religious ritual. The tea itself is poured from a height bordering on athletic, aiming for that elusive sweet spot between graceful cascade and scalded lap. Conversation bubbles alongside the steam, and you quickly realize this gathering is less about refreshment and more about navigating a small social obstacle course. First, the cake dilemma. An array of options tempts you: light sponge, dense fruitcake, and the scone, fluffy and intimidating in equal measure. Do you split it open or break it apart by hand? Cream first or jam? There are factions on either side of the debate, watching with thinly veiled judgment. Then come the sandwiches: cucumber, watercress, egg, so delicate you could eat a dozen and still feel faint. Stacked into precarious towers, crusts trimmed with military precision, filled so sparingly you start to wonder if the kitchen is rationing out of spite. Lifting one without scattering crumbs everywhere is, in its own quiet way, a genuine test of composure. Conversation walks its own tightrope, equal parts polite inquiry and calculated risk. You ask after everyone's health while carefully avoiding mention of any recent unfortunate ailments. You express interest in the local theater or the latest charity bazaar, all while your ears remain alert for the faintest whiff of scandal. A mysterious late-night carriage, a sudden absence from last week's gathering, the curious disappearance of the good cake from the dessert table. Poise is constantly being tested. You hold your cup just so, even as your arm slowly goes numb. The question of milk before or after the tea is best avoided entirely unless you're in the mood for a genuine philosophical debate. Dropping a spoon earns a brief, silent prayer. Knocking over the sugar bowl becomes the kind of story retold at family gatherings for decades. Throughout it all, the servants glide with practiced efficiency, refilling cups and clearing crumbs in a way that seems almost choreographed. You quietly envy their composure as you try to remember whether you've already greeted a particular guest or simply dreamed about doing so. By the end, you've survived more than a snack. You've navigated scone etiquette, sidestepped conversational traps, and resisted the powerful urge to eat an entire cake out of pure nervous energy. As you rise to leave, you give yourself a small, silent round of applause for an afternoon survived without scandal. Courtship. You flutter fans, exchange meaningful glances across crowded rooms, and try not to faint when a gloved hand brushes yours. Courtship is a campaign, equal parts romantic tension and ruthless competition. One wrong word, and you risk a lifetime of awkward encounters at every gathering for the rest of the season. In Regency England, Courtship has very little to do with love and everything to do with surviving a minefield of social protocol while keeping both your dignity and your inheritance fully intact. The day's events might officially be about tea, dancing, or poetry, but beneath every polite exchange lies a constant undercurrent of calculation. You are, at every moment, simultaneously securing your future and trying to avoid public humiliation. It begins with a glance. A well-timed meeting of eyes across a crowded room can launch a dozen whispered rumors and at least one hastily called family conference. Subtlety is essential. Linger too long and you're branded forward. Glance away too quickly and your interest disappears entirely. A flick of a fan, the hint of a smile, these are your tools, sharper in their own way than any dueling pistol. Conversation comes next, restricted almost entirely to approved topics. The weather, the most recent assembly perhaps, if you're feeling bold, the relative quality of the neighbor's sheep. Each word is a careful step. A joke too sharp, a compliment too direct, and your prospects could collapse entirely. You recall with some unease that last season's most promising suitor was quietly banished to the countryside after one ill-judged remark. Physical contact is its own hazardous territory. A gloved fingertip brushing yours during a dance is enough to send a ripple of speculation through an entire household. Let your hand linger even a moment too long, and you might as well start selecting silverware patterns, because the entire room has already drawn its conclusions. Of course, no courtship unfolds without competition. For every suitor, there are several rivals, more charming, better connected, suspiciously well-versed in poetry. Alliances form and dissolve as quickly as the weather changes, and entire friendships can hinge on something as small as a misplaced compliment. Hovering at the edges of every gathering are the parents, armed with extensive knowledge of family trees and dowries, gently steering you toward suitable matches while whispering reminders about connections and breeding. Surviving Regency courtship is, in itself, a small victory. By the end of the season, you've dodged the worst conversational pitfalls, escaped your most overeager admirers, and perhaps exchanged a quiet smile with someone who makes the endless rounds of dances and dinners feel almost worthwhile. If you avoid fainting, avoid scandal, and avoid being caught passing notes behind a potted plant, you are, by Regency standards, already winning. Etiquette. Every gesture, every word, every raised eyebrow is governed by rules older than your family estate. Etiquette manuals multiply like rabbits, and you live in a constant low-grade fear of reaching for the wrong fork. Social ruin is never more than one misplaced napkin away. From the moment you could toddle across a nursery, etiquette has been the most relentlessly drilled part of your education. There is a precise method for everything: how to greet a viscount, how long to maintain eye contact, when to speak never first, and what to say ideally, nothing of substance. Your governess's bookshelf groans beneath titles like The Complete Guide to Proper Conduct and On the Correct Handling of the Soup Spoon. Lessons begin promptly after breakfast each morning. You stand perfectly upright in the drawing room, a book balanced atop your head, as your instructor watches with the disappointed precision of a hawk. You're taught to walk gracefully, heel to toe, never clumsy. You're taught to sit properly, which apparently requires bending your spine into a shape rarely seen outside of architecture. Then come the handkerchief drills: how to produce one discreetly, how to dab without appearing to actually have a nose, and most crucially, how to feint elegantly should conversation veer into anything as shocking as politics. Conversation itself is an etiquette minefield. You rehearse phrases in front of the mirror. How charming indeed. And, I must say, your bonnet is truly one of a kind. Direct statements are heavily discouraged in favor of the gently implied insult, a compliment hovering somewhere between sincere and deeply suspicious. The real danger, though, lies at the dinner table. The cutlery arrangement alone resembles a small battle plan: multiple forks, several knives, a spoon shaped suspiciously like a tiny canoe. Choose incorrectly and you'll hear the sharp intake of breath from down the table, followed by the family's favorite spectator sport, watching you flounder. Napkins carry their own hazards, folded wrong, tucked in oddly, or worst of all, dropped to the floor, and your reputation suffers before dessert even arrives. Even facial expressions are subject to invisible law. Too much enthusiasm and you're labeled crude. Too little and you're labeled cold. A single poorly timed smile can spark gossip faster than a dropped teacup. And yet, despite the stress, there's real satisfaction in mastering it all. Gliding into a room with the correct balance of grace and indifference, selecting precisely the right fork without hesitation. These small victories feel, in their own absurd way, genuinely earned. So you practice, persevere, and hope. Because in Regency England, etiquette isn't simply decoration. It's survival strategy. And the price of failure is potentially your social standing, your family's reputation, and possibly your right to ever enjoy putting in peace again. Money. You never personally touch a coin. The household accounts, meanwhile, could probably fund a modest war. Daily expenses include shoeing horses, replacing lace curtains, and emergency funds for the occasional gambling loss. Debt, somehow, is fashionable. Money, for someone of your standing, exists mostly as a rumor, a distant abstraction discussed only when absolutely necessary, and ideally in French. You have an allowance so generous and vague you assume it's calculated using moon phases and the current price of imported fruit. Mentioning actual coins is, frankly, beneath you. The true heart of the family's finances beats inside the accounts room, presided over by the family steward, a man of mysterious skill, somehow able to balance ledgers through pure force of will and a quiet intimidation of local tradesmen. You encounter him rarely, usually when he appears with a stack of bills and a slightly haunted expression. "A moment, if you please," he begins, and you suddenly remember an urgent engagement elsewhere, anywhere, provided it doesn't involve subtraction. The expenses, when you pause to notice them, are staggering. Gowns from the capital, boots from abroad, hats that seem to reproduce overnight. The horses need shoeing. The carriage needs repair after last month's minor incident with a low stone wall. New wallpaper is required for the breakfast room because last season's shade is suddenly, inexplicably, unfashionable. Candles alone consume a small fortune. Properly lighting a home each evening requires a full staff and an entire forest's worth of wax. Gambling, of course, is an inevitable hazard of high society. A single evening at cards can end with your pride intact and your pockets empty, or, on one memorable occasion, with the deed to a small cottage changing hands over a disputed hand of cards. Nobody actually settles gambling debts promptly. Doing so would be considered hopelessly eager. Instead, debts circulate like social currency, their value determined largely by gossip and the odds of a convenient inheritance. Debt itself is treated less as misfortune and more as conversational flourish. Everyone has it. Few admit it outright. Creditors send polite notes, ignored until they become considerably less polite. Friends compare mounting obligations the way others might compare rare hobbies. "I owe nearly 2,000 on last week's wager," someone sighs. "Only 2,000, comes the reply. You're practically a pauper. Behind the glittering surface, real anxiety simmers. The family fortune must be preserved. Your ancestors seem to remind you from their dour portraits. Estate income, inheritance, and the occasional unexpected windfall all factor into a delicate balance. When the steward finally does corner you, he presents the figures with the solemnity of unwelcome prophecy. You nod gravely, vow to economize, and promptly order 2 more waistcoats just in case. The cycle continues. Money flows out, bills pile up, debts shuffle like playing cards, and you remain the very picture of Regency prosperity. Radiant, fashionable, and just slightly anxious every time the post arrives. Gossip. The only thing that travels faster than a Regency carriage is gossip. A misplaced glance, a mysterious midnight carriage, an overly familiar footman, and suddenly you're the leading story in every letter circulating through town. Survival means playing the game, or risking quiet exile to a far less interesting county. To live among the wealthy in Regency England is to exist permanently under observation. Every movement is dissected, magnified, repeated. Information, not gold, is the true social currency. If you haven't heard the latest scandal by breakfast, don't worry by lunch. It will find you, decorated with fresh embellishments and possibly an entirely invented subplot. It begins innocently enough. Perhaps you're seen walking alone in the evening, or you linger a moment too long in conversation with someone already spoken for. Sometimes it's as simple as wearing last season's color. It hardly matters. The rumor machine runs on novelty and a faint touch of malice. The true experts are the older women of the household, masters of subtle interrogation, eyebrows perpetually arched in feigned surprise at things they themselves often arranged. "I had no idea she was so fond of his company," someone murmurs, pure innocence laced with sharp intent. Within hours, invitations are quietly rescinded, alliances reshuffled, and someone is suddenly considering an unplanned trip to the countryside. The servants, meanwhile, are the unseen engine driving the whole machine. Maids carry news upstairs and down. Footmen trade tidbits over evening drinks. The butler, who hears everything and reveals nothing, quietly adjusts seating arrangements to keep known rivals at a safe distance. If you genuinely want to know what's happening, you do far better asking the kitchen staff than reading any society page. For the bold, scandal can even be wielded strategically, just enough notoriety to stay interesting, never quite enough to be sent away for the waters. Secrets, predictably, never stay secret long. A quiet confession over tea blooms into full drama within the week. Lovers' quarrels, overdue debts, a hidden stash of imported chocolate, all become fuel for the gossip mill. Your best defense is absolute composure, a well-rehearsed look of total innocence, and a story you can recite consistently even if you can't quite remember why your glove was found on the terrace at midnight. Sometimes the rumor mill grinds a little too fine, and a harmless flirtation snowballs into genuine scandal, at which point you're gently, never explicitly, advised to take the air, somewhere far from town. The truly skilled know how to fan these flames just enough to stay interesting without burning the entire house down. There are alliances, too, fragile and shifting, built on traded secrets and the unspoken understanding that today's confidant might be tomorrow's source. In the end, nothing in Regency society stays secret forever, so you learn to smile through whispers, laugh in all the right places, and remember always, in the war of words, survival favors the quick, the well-connected, and those who know precisely when to keep a secret and when to spread one. Boredom. Sometimes you simply recline and stare meaningfully out a window for 3 uninterrupted hours, quietly pondering the tragedy of being so wealthy and yet so profoundly bored. You consider taking up a hobby, but you're far too tired from all the napping. In Regency England, idleness isn't merely tolerated, it's practically a virtue. The truly elite have mastered the art of filling their days with an astonishing quantity of nothing, all while maintaining the appearance that something terribly important is unfolding. The chaise becomes your command post. A book sits open in your lap for days, pages occasionally turning to maintain the illusion of progress. Boredom, in fact, functions as a kind of status symbol. To appear busy suggests you might actually have to be. Far better to seem perpetually at leisure, as though any strenuous activity might threaten your delicate constitution. You consider sketching, or perhaps the pianoforte, but motivation, like soap, is in short supply today. Besides, you're still recovering from the considerable exertion of standing up earlier to greet a visiting aunt. Occasionally, inspiration flickers. You consider a walk, but that would require summoning a servant to locate your bonnet, and frankly, the garden will still be there tomorrow. Your brother wanders in, mutters something about riding out, and instead collapses into the chair beside you. The two of you sit in companionable silence, united in the shared labor of simply existing. Time moves strangely in these stretches. You picture yourself, years from now, immortalized in a museum exhibit captioned simply, "In a characteristic pose of gentle ennui." A servant enters periodically to tend the fire, offering a faintly pointed cough as a reminder that, yes, it is still daylight and no, you haven't moved. You consider a cause, perhaps sponsoring a local improvement project, but the mere thought of picking up a pen feels exhausting. Eventually hunger stirs you, though even ringing for a snack feels like more effort than it's worth. Instead, you compromise by simply daydreaming about cake, glancing hopefully toward the tea tray. As the afternoon light fades, you stretch luxuriously, satisfied with a day spent accomplishing precisely nothing. And isn't that, in the end, the truest privilege of all? Shopping. A trip to the fashionable shopping street is both sport and power display. You purchase hats you'll never wear and trinkets you don't particularly like, purely for appearances. Extra points if you manage to drive up the price of imported silk, just to inconvenience a rival. Shopping in Regency England has very little to do with necessity and everything to do with making a statement. The destination is always the same, a glittering stretch of fashionable shops where the wealthy parade their fortunes, and the shopkeepers have developed the watchful patience of seasoned card players. This isn't a quick errand. It's theater, competition, and public relations, all rolled into one outing. Preparation begins long before you set foot outside. A new bonnet, ideally one no one else owns, gloves with not a single wrinkle, a parasol elaborate enough to double as a stage prop. In the carriage, you rehearse your lines, clever remarks for the milliner, veiled jabs for any rivals you might encounter, and the all-important line, "Oh, I suppose I could manage one more ribbon if absolutely necessary." Upon arrival, eager shop staff greet you, each hopping to secure both your purchase and a fresh piece of gossip. Shop windows gleam with hats, gloves, and every imaginable accessory. You pause outside each one, assessing both the merchandise and the competition. The true skill isn't simply buying, it's being seen buying, ideally while laughing carelessly at the price tag. Inside, the real performance begins. The milliner presents her latest creation as straight from the continent, even as you privately wonder how many feathers were sacrificed in its construction. The dressmaker unfurls bolts of silk luminous enough to guide ships through fog, and you nod thoughtfully while glancing sideways at a rival quietly eyeing the exact same shade. There are rituals to the haggling, not to actually save money, but to demonstrate that you could pay full price and simply choose not to. Surely this isn't lined with gold, you sigh, watching your rival bristle and quietly signal her own interest. If you're feeling particularly strategic, you feign mild interest in a less fashionable item, hoping she'll snap it up and mark herself by next week as hopelessly behind the trend. Gifts pile up for relatives you barely tolerate. Gloves are purchased in every available shade, just in case of a sudden shortage. Porcelain trinkets, hand-painted fans, the occasional novelty item nobody asked for, each purchase doubles as both souvenir and signal, proof to the world that you remain firmly at the center of things. Ultimately, the shopping isn't truly about the items at all, it's about the stories you'll tell afterward. How you discovered a rare bolt of fabric, how you outbid several rivals for a particularly fine parasol. Shopping is reputation, and reputation in this world is everything. You return home with parcels stacked precariously in a servant's arms, your purse considerably lighter, your spirits oddly high, and the local gossip network freshly supplied with material. Dinner. Dinner is where alliances form and enemies are made, typically over an overcooked bird and a suspicious gelatinous dish nobody can quite identify. The wine flows freely, conversation sparkles, and someone, without fail, says something they'll regret for years. The Regency dinner party is the true main event, a nightly performance staged entirely by candlelight, where everyone's talents, or glaring lack thereof, are put on full display. Arrival alone is its own ordeal. Carriages pile up along the drive, footmen straining to announce names without mangling them beyond recognition. Once inside, you're swept through a sea of silk and brocade toward a room fragrant with roasted meat and beeswax thick enough to dull your sense of smell entirely. Seating is a delicate operation, arranged by the hostess with all the precision of a military campaign. You hope to be placed beside someone tolerable, capable of discussing horses, poetry, or at minimum some juicy family history. Fate, however, is rarely so kind, and you more often find yourself wedged between an elderly relative convinced of the medicinal properties of boiled vegetables and a guest determined to discuss crop rotation in exhaustive detail. The meal itself unfolds as a parade of dubious delicacies. Soup arrives first, lukewarm and faintly mysterious, followed by course after course ranging from acceptable to outright alarming. There's invariably a roast of some kind, surrounded by vegetables boiled well past recognition. A wobbling, jellied dish makes its inevitable appearance, and you decide quietly that some culinary mysteries are better left unsolved. Footmen drift like silent phantoms throughout, refilling glasses and clearing plates just as you finally work up the nerve to try something questionable. Conversation is the true main course, served in endless overlapping portions. Topics rotate: local gossip, recent plays, the likelihood of rain bouncing across the table like a particularly competitive game. You laugh at the right moments, nod thoughtfully at the wrong ones, and do your best not to spill anything down your front, though even that is something of a time-honored tradition. No dinner is complete without at least one small disaster: a dropped fork, a misused utensil, or in one legendary household incident, a bread roll launched with surprising force directly into a guest's lap. As the wine flows more freely, tongues loosen, old grudges resurface, secret alliances are quietly hinted at. Someone, emboldened by a third glass, tells a joke just slightly too risque, and the older relatives pointedly pretend not to hear. A towering dessert eventually makes its triumphant appearance, more spectacle than substance. The women rise and drift off in clouds of perfume to gossip in the drawing room, while the men remain behind to debate politics, brandy, and who, precisely, won last year's legendary dispute over cheese. You retreat at last, head spinning slightly, already dreading the next invitation. Because in Regency England, dinner isn't simply a meal. It's an endurance event, a social labyrinth, and a cautionary tale, all served alongside thoroughly overcooked vegetables. The ballroom. You twirl, you bow, you perspire quietly beneath a chandelier the size of a small carriage. The ballroom is a battlefield disguised as a social gathering, and survival demands sharp elbows and an even sharper sense of timing. From the moment you step into the grand ballroom, the air thickens with anticipation, perfume, and the faint scent of panic. The polished floor gleams like a frozen pond, daring anyone to attempt a waltz without risking public disaster. Every surface glitters under the light of countless candles, reflected endlessly in mirrors and cut glass, enough to make even the wealthiest guest nervous about an errant elbow. Your entrance is its own small event. You glide or attempt to across the floor as your name is announced with great solemnity, and every head turns to assess your dress, posture, and escort. You scan the room, noting familiar faces, filing away potential rivals, because the wrong dance partner tonight could follow you through an entire season. The dancing begins, and the real contest starts. It has little to do with rhythm and everything to do with strategy. Each set is a chance to display both grace and connections. The wrong partner means a tedious half hour. The right one might mean a whispered secret, or on rare occasion, genuine romance. You move through the steps carefully, avoiding the watchful gaze of chaperones stationed around the perimeter like quiet sentries. Conversation during a dance is its own small sport, interested but not overly so, witty but never threatening, and absolutely never veering into politics or livestock prices. The musicians, paid by the hour, play with the energy of men fully aware they'll be performing again at supper. Occasionally a guest faints, whether from heat, excitement, or the sudden horror of realizing they've just danced 2 sets in a row with their own cousin. Refreshments offer brief reprieve before the next gauntlet begins. You make your way to the sideboard, elbowing gently through a crowd of giggling debutantes and bored older relatives. Someone always spills a drink. Someone always laughs too loudly. By night's end, your feet ache, your hairstyle has begun to wilt, and your memory of who slighted whom has become hopelessly tangled. And yet, as you curtsy through the final set, you understand that surviving the ballroom was never really about the dancing at all. It was about reading the room, dodging drama, and somehow looking radiant under enormous pressure. After dark, when the sun finally sets, the real business begins. Lovers slip into gardens. Rival relatives exchange whispered threats in dim hallways, and the servants quietly place bets on who, exactly, will be caught first. The shift from the dazzling chaos of the ballroom to the hush of late evening happens almost without notice. One moment you're dodging elbows on the dance floor, the next you're slipping out a side door, the weight of unspoken words pressing against your chest. The garden, so properly arranged by day, transforms after dark into a maze of shadow and quiet possibility. Stone benches, usually reserved for daytime conversation, now host whispered confessions and the occasional broken heart. Listen closely, and you'll catch the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, the snap of a fan closing in mock indignation, the muffled laughter of a couple failing rather badly to hide behind a hedge. Moonlight catches on a dropped hairpin, evidence of a hurried departure, or perhaps the quiet beginning of a story that will be retold at family gatherings for years. Inside, the house hums with its own late-night intrigue. In dim corridors, rival siblings exchange sly warnings and barbed compliments. The unspoken rule is simple. Whatever happens after midnight may be forgiven by dawn, provided it isn't too public. Servants, meanwhile, move through this after-hours world like seasoned spies, overhearing everything, repeating nothing, except perhaps among themselves, where wagers are quietly placed on who will be caught where and by whom. There's a strange freedom in the darkness, a brief suspension of the endless rules that govern daylight hours. An old rival might become, just for an evening, an unlikely confidant. But danger lingers close behind, the risk of an untimely encounter with a returning chaperone, or a wandering relative in search of a misplaced shawl. You learn to move quietly, always ready with a plausible excuse close at hand. As dawn approaches, the whispers fade, and you slip back inside, smoothing your hair and rehearsing your most innocent expression. Whatever happened in the dark hours is carefully tucked away, ready to resurface only when the next family gathering demands a fresh round of teasing. Hygiene. Soap is scarce, baths are scarcer, and your perfume alone could probably stop a charging bull. Hair is one open flame away from disaster, and deodorant remains, as far as anyone can tell, an entirely foreign rumor. Smelling wealthy is, in its own way, a full-time occupation. In Regency England, personal hygiene is less science and more performance, an elaborate illusion of freshness rather than the genuine article. Bathing, for the upper classes, isn't a daily event but a full production requiring multiple servants, a procession of steaming buckets, and the constant risk of flooding the floor below. You, meanwhile, quietly attempt to look enthusiastic while secretly hoping the whole affair can be postponed another week. Most days, you rely instead on the sponge bath applied with caution, and primarily to areas likely to be exposed to public scrutiny. Soap, when available, is homemade, somewhat harsh, and carries an unmistakable hint of animal fat beneath whatever fragrance was added. Most mornings, you simply dab rose water or lavender at your wrists and neck and hope for the best. Hair is its own daily battle. For men, pomade and powder combine to create styles rigid enough to survive a strong wind. For women, hours of curling and arranging end in a cloud of scented powder thick enough to make any open flame a genuine hazard. Deodorant, in the modern sense, simply doesn't exist. Instead, you rely on strategically applied perfume, your shield and your sword. Arrive at any gathering trailing a scent strong enough to guide lost guests through fog, and you're considered a triumph of personal presentation. Linger too long in one spot, however, and you may be politely asked not to sit on the good upholstery. Laundry follows similar logic. Clothes are washed sparingly, since repeated washing wears down expensive fabric and fades costly dyes. Instead, garments are aired, sprayed with floral water, and occasionally beaten with sticks to dislodge dust. You maintain a generous rotation of undergarments specifically to avoid too many trips to the disapproving laundry maid. Teeth are cleaned with twigs, charcoal, or whatever abrasive happens to be fashionable that season. The resulting mouthwash tends to burn more than refresh, and everyone remains slightly cautious about smiling too broadly by candlelight. And yet, despite all this creative improvisation, the result is a society that smells unmistakably wealthy: rose, citrus, old wool, and quiet ambition. In Regency England, if you can convincingly fake cleanliness, you can survive almost anything. Health. Your physician prescribes leeches for headaches and brandy for nearly everything else. Surgery happens by candlelight, and dental care exists somewhere between folklore and outright nightmare. You pray for good health, and honestly, even harder for good genetics. In Regency England, your well-being is less about actual medical knowledge and more about sheer luck and a sturdy constitution. Doctors arrive with great confidence, brandishing instruments rarely understood and prescriptions written in handwriting that may as well be ancient script. No matter the ailment, the treatment rarely strays far from rest, hope, and in serious cases, an urgent consultation with the family priest. Medical advice is delivered with absolute certainty and very little actual evidence behind it. Feeling faint? A brisk walk is recommended, followed by a long nap and a course of leeches applied to the temples. Suffering from low spirits? Mineral water, a change of scenery, and possibly a tincture of something opium-based, diluted generously with optimism. Stomach troubles call for brandy, internally, externally, and occasionally as a general anesthetic for everyone else in the room. The family medicine cabinet overflows with dubious remedies: smelling salts, blistering ointments, enough camphor to fumigate a small church. Coughs are met with syrup thick enough to seal a leaky roof. Fevers earn you a cocoon of blankets while the household debates whether you ought to be bled or simply given more toast. Bleeding, naturally, is the physician's favorite move. Too much blood, you're bled. Too little, well, clearly the last doctor took too much. Dental care requires actual bravery. Toothaches are constant companions, relieved only by strong drink and the hope that the local barber surgeon happens to be in a generous mood that day. Extractions involve pliers and a fair amount of prayer. False teeth, crafted from ivory or bone, are both engineering marvel and daily hazard. You learn quickly to chew carefully on one side. Surgery, when unavoidable, is a grim spectacle, performed on the kitchen table with the curtains drawn. Instruments are boiled if you're fortunate, wiped on an apron if you're not. Anesthetic amounts to a generous swig of brandy and something sturdy to bite down on. If you survive, you become something of a local legend. Preventative medicine relies heavily on superstition, carrying a sprig of certain herbs to ward off illness, wearing particular colors believed to keep your organs warm. No one's entirely sure why these things might help, but no one's eager to test the alternative either. And so you make peace with uncertainty, hopping your ancestors passed down something sturdier than weak ankles, grateful each morning to wake up with every tooth still firmly in place. Belowstairs. Beneath the marble floors, the real action happens. The staff function like a finely tuned, occasionally mutinous orchestra. They see everything, know everything, and could quietly dismantle your reputation over something as small as a badly folded napkin. While the family glides above in silk and scandal, the servant's world below pulses with its own entirely separate energy. The kitchen is a furnace of constant activity, the cook commanding her domain with a wooden spoon wielded like a royal scepter. Scullery maids scrub endlessly, footmen polish silver while quietly dreaming of less exhausting employment, and even the lowest-ranking stable boy has opinions about your latest waistcoat, whispered, naturally, only to the cat. The hierarchy Belowstairs is every bit as rigid as anything upstairs. The butler presides with the solemnity of a minor church official, keys jangling as he patrols the corridors, fully aware of every secret the household holds. The housekeeper rules with equal authority and an even sharper glare, capable of silencing an entire kitchen with a single look. Meals Belowstairs are less formal but no less competitive, with gossip serving as the true main course. The staff often know who's in debt, who's quietly falling in love, and who's heading for trouble long before any family member catches on. Nicknames circulate freely, and no small blunder goes unnoticed. Forget to tip generously at Christmas, and stories of your stinginess will echo through the servants' grapevine for years. In quiet moments, the cook trades recipes with the gardener, who keeps a watchful eye for wandering livestock and the ongoing, unspoken war against garden pests. The unofficial household motto remains simple: seen, not heard, unless speaking among themselves. They move through every gathering like quiet ghosts, refilling glasses before anyone notices they're empty, managing both minor mishaps and full-blown crises with barely a flicker of visible concern. This is no life of mindless drudgery, though. The staff maintain their own traditions and quiet celebrations, singing in the kitchen, secret card games in the pantry, an annual gathering where rank is briefly forgotten, and everyone dances until dawn. While the family upstairs imagines itself the center of the universe, the real engine of the household runs on strong tea, quiet scheming, and the steady camaraderie of people who know they'll be working together again tomorrow. Bedtime. As midnight nears, you slip toward sleep with one final cup of spiced wine, a brief murmured prayer, and a handful of superstitions meant to ward off thieves, ghosts, and overly curious ants. Tomorrow, the entire cycle begins again. Bedtime in Regency England is treated with nearly as much ceremony as a formal event. Your day's finery is peeled away layer by layer, revealing simpler nightwear beneath: linen, flannel, or, for the truly fortunate, silk. A maid stands ready with a warmed nightgown, careful to keep the fabric well clear of any open flame, a lesson the household has not forgotten since last winter's near disaster. Making the bed itself is its own small production, involving at least 2 servants, multiple mattresses, and an uncertain number of blankets, each arranged with the careful precision of someone packing precious cargo. The goal is a sleeping environment soft as a cloud, though in practice it more often resembles a slightly lumpy fortress with unpredictable cold spots. No proper Regency bedtime is complete without a quick nod to household superstition. A sprig of dried herb tucked beneath the pillow, said to ward off bad dreams. Curtains drawn tightly, partly for privacy, mostly to keep out drafts and any wandering spirits. A shoe pointed deliberately toward the window, a small trick meant to confuse troublesome ghosts or overconfident burglars. You murmur a brief prayer tailored to the day's specific concerns, gratitude for surviving another dinner, a quiet hope that a certain aunt has forgotten your earlier comment, a fervent wish that the household might steer well clear of your slippers tonight. Settling in is rarely simple. You adjust pillows, shift position, discover the sheets are either too cold or mysteriously too warm in one particular spot. Somewhere downstairs a door closes softly. Outside the wind sighs, and you pull the blankets up just a little higher. Briefly convinced every shadow conceals either a ghost or a gossiping relative. Eventually, though, sleep does arrive, carrying you toward dreams of tomorrow's breakfast, next week's ball, and the endless, comforting cycle of fashion and mild social anxiety. There's a strange comfort in knowing that, for all the day's absurdity, you've made it through one more turn of the wheel, and tomorrow, with any luck, you'll get to do it all over again. Fashion and discomfort before any event, you're laced, pinned, and stuffed into clothing engineered, it seems, by people with a genuine grudge against breathing. Breathe too deeply and risk a wardrobe failure dramatic enough to make tomorrow's gossip circuit. The price of beauty: occasional fainting, daily discomfort, and a quiet, persistent longing for something, anything soft and loose. In Regency England, fashion isn't just about appearance. It's a public demonstration of your willingness to suffer politely for the sake of society. Dressing is less a morning routine and more a feat of physical endurance. The process starts hours before you're due anywhere, with garments laid out by a long-suffering maid or valet who has long since mastered the art of sympathetic silence. For women, the corset is the central adversary, a construction of boning, lacing, and quiet optimism, designed to sculpt the ideal silhouette while gently inconveniencing your internal organs. Lacing is very much a team sport, conducted while gripping the bedpost and silently bargaining with your own lungs. Men face their own particular trial in the cravat, that infamously complicated strip of neckwear, governed by entire pamphlets devoted solely to its proper tying. Too loose and you're deemed careless. Too tight, and fainting before the first course becomes a real possibility. Either outcome guarantees the cravat a permanent place in your nightmares. Layer upon layer follows: petticoats and undergarments, waistcoats and fitted coats. Each seem a small reminder that comfort was clearly never the priority. Shoes, delicate and elegant, function more like quiet instruments of punishment, and every step becomes a small gamble between style and survival. Even hair demands suffering. Women endure hours beneath hot irons, hairpins multiplying until the scalp resembles a small fortified hedge. Men sit patiently while barbers apply enough product to weatherproof a roof. Hats and bonnets, sized generously enough to double as lifeboats, complete the look. Accessories present their own minefield, gloves fitted precisely, fans and parasols each carrying unspoken rules of their own. And yet, despite all this discomfort, everyone perseveres, trading stories of wardrobe disasters like Old War wounds. In Regency England, looking good is, in its own strange way, a triumph of willpower over basic anatomy. Petty feuds and social warfare. Being wealthy in Regency England means treating the smallest insult as an act of open war. Did someone accidentally spill tea on your new dress? Was your invitation to a neighbor's gathering mysteriously lost in the post? Every day offers a fresh opportunity for elaborate revenge, strategic snubbing, or a full-blown feud future generations will pretend to find fascinating. You might assume that, with so much wealth and leisure to occupy them, the upper classes would have little appetite left for drama. On the contrary, society's true pastime isn't the dancing or the dining, but the quiet, ongoing art of social warfare. Every interaction becomes a chance to score a point, nurse a grudge, or quietly one-up a neighbor in a way that will be discussed for years. Petty rivalries fuel the entire ecosystem. A snub at a gathering, a delayed return visit, a half-hearted compliment on someone's new hat, each becomes ammunition in an endless, bloodless conflict. Invitations themselves become weapons. To be excluded is to be publicly erased, your absence noted, analyzed, whispered about until it takes on the proportions of genuine scandal. Feuds, once sparked, can simmer for years. A grudge over a poorly chosen dress color from a decade-old ball might still color every interaction between two families. Revenge, when finally served, tends to be quiet and calculated, careful seating arrangements, a perfectly timed introduction, a backhanded compliment delivered with apparent sincerity. There are alliances too, of course, as shifting and unreliable as the weather. Today's confidant may well be tomorrow's rival, and everyone understands the unspoken rule. The secret you're sharing now could just as easily become next week's gossip. For those raised in it, this constant low-grade social conflict isn't exhausting. It's simply texture, purpose woven into otherwise uneventful afternoons. After all, what's the point of the finest china and the most opulent carriage if you can't occasionally wield them as quiet weapons? Travel, you can afford a carriage, a coachman, and horses with grander names than most people's children. And yet travel remains a genuine obstacle course, muddy roads, aggressive livestock, and wheels apparently engineered to fail at the most inconvenient possible moment. In theory, Regency travel sounds seductive. A gleaming carriage, glossy horses, a footman dressed well enough to be mistaken for minor nobility. In practice, it's closer to a rolling endurance test. Preparation alone is its own small chaos. Trunks packed, arguments had over the precise number of bonnets necessary for a 2-day trip, an elderly relative insisting on bringing her own traveling teapot. Once aboard, the illusion of elegance lasts roughly 30 seconds. The carriage rocks with every rut in the road, springs creaking ominously, and you cling to a window strap while gripping a perfumed handkerchief with the other hand. Roads alternate between dust and mud depending on the season, and every turn carries the genuine possibility of encountering a flock of geese fully prepared to defend their territory. Your coachman, selected primarily for loyalty and a remarkable indifference to disaster, narrates the journey in gruff, reassuring fragments. The footman, perched precariously at the rear, leaps down as needed to chase off livestock or assist with whatever minor catastrophe has occurred. Inside, the journey doubles as a social event, relatives fanning themselves, children asking with maddening regularity whether you've arrived yet, someone inevitably feeling unwell. Arriving fashionably late isn't a stylistic choice. It's the only realistic outcome. You descend from the carriage windswept and slightly mud-splattered, composing yourself as best you can. Your host, having endured similar journeys themselves, simply smiles knowingly. There's a peculiar thrill to it all, though. You've crossed the countryside, weathered the elements, and arrived largely intact, ready to recount the journey at supper, conveniently omitting the part involving the geese. Estate management-owning land sounds glamorous right up until you're expected to deal with tenants, leaking roofs, and an accountant who sighs audibly every time he reviews your spending. Your approach to estate management mostly involves delegating everything and hoping nobody notices you can't actually read a crop report. In Regency England, land equals influence, and a grand estate is your ticket into the very top tier of society. From a distance, it glitters, sweeping views, endless parties, the comforting sound of money trickling steadily into your accounts. The reality is a never-ending stream of small crises disguised as matters requiring your attention. The estate steward arrives each morning bearing a ledger the size of a family Bible and an expression of carefully restrained disapproval. His reports cover everything from the state of the hedges to the unpredictable price of grain, all delivered in a tone suggesting he'd much rather handle things without your interference. Then there are the tenants, dozens of families whose names blur together after the first few pages of the rent ledger, remarkably skilled at producing creative explanations for late payments. Touring the cottages means nodding sympathetically at leaking roofs while promising repairs you'll likely forget to authorize. Repairs themselves are endless. Fences collapse, gardens grow wild, contractors arrive with wildly differing interpretations of reasonable cost. You approve plans with a flourish, sign checks with a quiet sigh, and develop a deep fondness for the phrase, "Let's leave that to the steward." There's also the household accountant, whose primary hobby seems to be sighing dramatically while presenting your monthly expenses. You smile, offer him a biscuit, and vaguely promise to review things more closely. Crop reports arrive covered in cryptic notes about blight and drought, which you flip through with the confidence of someone who has never actually seen a wheat field up close, before delegating the decision entirely with a cheerful do whatever seems best. And still, at every gathering, peers ask the same questions. How are the crops this year? Any luck with the new drainage system? You murmur something about challenging conditions and quietly hope nobody asks you to actually define crop rotation. Managing an estate, in truth, has very little to do with control and everything to do with survival, yours, and that of the overworked staff quietly holding the entire operation together. Quiet dread you have everything silk, servants, endless leisure, and yet every so often a quiet unease creeps in. Is this really all there is? You find yourself staring into the fire, contemplating the fleeting nature of youth and wondering, somewhat uncomfortably, whether your closest friend has been secretly borrowing your hair powder. This is the part no portrait ever captures, the long, quiet afternoons where nothing is demanded of you. Nothing is urgent, and yet something still feels faintly wrong. You sit in a chair upholstered richly enough to furnish a small chapel, and instead of comfort, you feel restless. The fire crackles. The clock ticks. You sigh, hoping someone notices. No one does. In Regency England, boredom becomes a kind of chronic condition, especially among the wealthy. You've exhausted every sanctioned amusement, walked the grounds, hosted the dinners, played the cards, attended every ball worth attending. And now here you are again, wrapped in luxury and a mild, unplaceable heaviness, wondering whether this feeling is philosophical insight or simply the aftereffects of too much cake. Melancholy, in its own strange way, becomes fashionable. People speak of it in hushed, poetic tones, as though sadness itself were a tasteful accessory. You read mournful poetry aloud, pausing meaningfully, hoping it might explain the feeling. It doesn't, but everyone nods politely, which helps a little. You consider charity work, then immediately feel tired at the thought. You consider learning to paint, but abandon the idea halfway through, certain someone else is already better at it. You pace, sit, stare into the fire some more, and your thoughts wander somewhere a little more dangerous. What if the best years have already passed? What if everyone else understands something you don't? The servants, sensing the mood, bring tea. It helps briefly. Then the thoughts creep quietly back in. You wonder whether your life amounts to anything beyond social calls and perfectly folded napkins. There's no proper etiquette for this particular feeling. You can't faint over it, though people certainly try, and brandy doesn't quite reach it either. Doctors suggest fresh air. Relatives suggest marriage. Friends suggest simply scheduling another party and pretending the feeling doesn't exist. None of it works especially well. And yet this quiet dissatisfaction seems to live everywhere, in the brief flicker behind someone's smile across the drawing room, in the silence between conversations, in the late hours when the house finally falls still and there's nothing left to distract you from your own thoughts. So you do what everyone else does. You straighten your posture, smooth your dress, and carry on. Tomorrow brings breakfast, letters, calls, obligations enough to fill the hours once again. The feeling recedes, never quite gone, simply tucked carefully behind silk and ceremony. Because in Regency England, money buys comfort, status, and beauty, but peace of mind, it turns out, is sold separately. So tonight, as you settle into your own mattress, hopefully free of mysterious lumps or distant chamberpot logistics, take just a moment to appreciate how genuinely extraordinary your ordinary modern comforts really are. Because surviving even a single day as Regency England's filthy rich required more luck, patience, and powdered hairstyling than most of us could ever hope to muster. You've endured a corset that doubled as a medieval restraint device, social rules as rigid as iron, and a breakfast where the main course was quiet anxiety. You've navigated gossip, sharp wit, and at least 3 distinct forms of passive-aggressive family warfare, all before noon. You've been powdered, perfumed, and silently judged by an entire household of relatives. And somehow you made it through. You dodged scandal, avoided fainting at dinner, and kept your cravat straight despite the creeping existential dread that comes from having considerably more money than genuine peace of mind. The truth is, even for the wealthiest, Regency life was a dizzying balancing act. Equal parts absurdity, boredom, and surprisingly real resilience. It turns out being surrounded by servants doesn't actually shield you from bad luck, questionable hygiene, or the sudden, overwhelming realization that you traded all for a hot shower and a pair of comfortable sweatpants. So as you drift off tonight, tucked into clean sheets, perhaps with a fan humming softly somewhere nearby, spare a thought for the historical figures who endured itchy stockings, judgmental relatives, and an endless web of etiquette. History may be ridiculous, uncomfortable, and occasionally genuinely tragic, but it's also proof that people, no matter how wealthy, will always find something to complain about, laugh about, and eventually, quietly, be grateful for. May your dreams stay free of social obligations, powdered wigs, and unexpected dinner guests, Good night and sleep well.